Welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we cut through the bullshit
Greggy,
so we can get naked.
you can't say that.
Why not? How would you say it then?
Well, maybe more like, welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we undress emotionally so we can undress physically.
That's exactly what I said. Not sure what the problem is. Welcome to episode number
55.
We are so glad you're here. I can't believe how excited we are. Amy's especially excited.
Yeah, I'm kind of like bursting out of my seat over here.
She loves to read and to learn, and she has come across two wonderful books that she's used in her coaching practice and in our own married life that have been wonderful to us. And we are lucky enough to have the author on with us today, Dr. Kathleen Smith. We would love to have you introduce yourself, Kathleen.
Yes. So first of all, thank you both for having me on your podcast. And I am a licensed therapist and a writer, and I live in Washington, D.C. I have a daughter. I'm an only child. So maybe nobody will take anything I say seriously after hearing that.
That's right.
Right.
Off right there.
But I'm also, my therapy training is in Bowen Family Systems Theory. And so after graduate school, I did my training as a therapist at a place in Washington, D.C. called the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family. And I'm also on the faculty there and have been teaching in some of their training programs. And I think that's it. I think we're going to talk about some of my writing, so I don't have to give you guys the long list.
We'll let Amy introduce the two books since she's the huge fan. So go ahead,
Yes.
Amy.
So I once heard that someone writes in the front of their books what they love about that book, like a little summary, And I was thinking, if I wrote in the front of these books, I would be rewriting the entire book. Like I wouldn't take anything out. So as you can see, if you're watching, I'm holding Everything Isn't Terrible and True to You. Everything Isn't Terrible came first, and then True to You came out more recently. And they are dog-eared and written in and marked because they're that good. I find that in the world of self-help and therapy and all of these types of books, there are very few books, I read a lot of them, but there are very few that I think are written in a way that everyone can understand, that are applicable, that describe the pain points and the ways to develop yourself through those pain points as clearly as these two books. So I think your voice in these, Kathleen, is so relatable and so real. People often don't want to read therapy books because they sound fake or inauthentic. And these are very authentic and very real and also very digestible and relatable and understandable and applicable. So I can't say enough good things about them. I recommend them all the time.
Thank you so much.
And
that's so kind. That's the goal. That's
Yeah.
the goal, to not overcomplicate things,
and it's hard to do because you really can just get into over explaining and over analyzing and over theorizing. And I have a lot of people who come to me and know a lot about theory. And then it's like, but now what? Like, how does this relate to me? What do I do with this? And I think these are two books that not only describe the theory, but then point you towards those questions that direct you towards the development. Okay, now what does this mean for me? Okay, now what do I do with this information? And that's what I think is so amazing about them. It's not just, here's all this lovely information. It's, here's this really important information, and here's how you can make it personal and applicable and to your situation and circumstance. So I can't say enough good things
Thank
about
you.
them.
Yeah, I think some of the ideas are easy to understand. Putting them into practice is much more difficult. But that was sort of my goal, that some of these ideas and concepts aren't hard. I think often therapists and professionals sort of make the case that they are complex, and I think that's just bad writing if people can't understand what you're saying. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with the first book that you wrote, because I think that's a good foundation, and then we'll go
Sure.
into the other one. Um, the first book you wrote is Everything Isn't Terrible: Conquering Your Insecurities, Interrupt Your Anxiety, and Finally Calm Down. And I think this is the introduction to that anxiety is a part of life, and it's a part of every human relationship. Like, it is unavoidable. And it's part of the growing factor that when we learn where we are anxious, how we're reacting in that anxiety, that those are all opportunities to see our blind spots or to see where we have capacity to develop. And in that anxiety is also a chance to develop through it and create not only a stronger sense of yourself, but also a stronger relationship with whichever relationship you're referring to. So, this first one is all about the anxiety of being in all types of relationships, whether it's your family, your friends, your community, your marriage, your work, any of the systems that relationships appear in. And I love that you address the same theory of anxiety and relationships in all the different capacities. It's almost like a reference book. Like, okay, I have anxiety about dating, or anxiety about my boss, or anxiety about my children, or anxiety about my parents, and you can like flip to the chapter and have a really great roadmap to direct you towards your own development.
Yeah. I that was purposeful, because I think people are at different stages of life and they're thinking about different challenges, and I wanted it to be useful to people, whatever challenge they were thinking about.
And I love, I'm going to get to questions in just a minute, but I love how each chapter has an observe, like a prompt to observe, what part are you playing in this? Where is your anxiety showing up, and how? And that willingness to like be curious about yourself. And then an evaluate, like a self confrontation. It's almost like, are you willing to unjustify yourself? Are you willing to look at your stories and see where you're making yourself the victim, or where you're not seeing your capacity? And then interrupting that. And that's the facing the discomfort of the change, of showing up differently, of thinking and feeling differently. And so I love that you get so specific in each one. I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. So, my question is really, you talk a lot about managing anxiety, and I'm curious how, and that the opposite of anxiety is curiosity. I'm curious how you came to that and what you saw in your practice that led you to those two being opposites.
I think, people want to rush towards changing their behaviors. They want to improve themselves as quickly as possible. I'm certainly guilty of that myself. But I think people need to be reminded of how observation really changes the game. Like, if you're about, let's say, to spend time with your whole family for Thanksgiving, right? And you're just rushing into it, same old people, you're reacting to people the same way. You're trying to control them in the same ways. You're frustrated with them. There's no curiosity there. But a person who is going into that gathering, saying to themselves, okay, here we go. Let's see what people do. This is so interesting. Are my predictions right? What do I notice myself doing, right? Like that's already changed the game, and you may not have even stepped in the door yet, right? But you're able to engage your own thinking in a way that's different versus being totally on autopilot, right? And that doesn't mean you might not do some of the exact same things that frustrate you, right?
Right.
But you have a better chance at being
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of play around with your responses, to try something out, to not be so hard on yourself when you kind of get sucked into doing sort of what you usually do, right? It's just that curiosity helps you engage it differently. And I think it also creates freedom in our relationships, right? People notice when you're sort of putting more thinking into how you act. They might not like it at first, but it does create that freedom and that space for flexibility for things to change, right? And so I often want to slow people down and say, okay, well, let's not try and do anything differently. I just want you to, observe, gather some data, come back, think about what that data is and what you want to do with it. And people find that useful. They start to maybe even have a little bit of fun with it, which I think is so exciting to see.
That is absolutely amazing, right? Because I often talk to my clients about you can always double down with curiosity. You're never going to go wrong, right? And the thing that you said that was so beautiful about that is we want the quick fix. That's society, right? We want tell me the 10 things. We always get what are the 10 steps to make my marriage better? And we often say there aren't 10 steps because each of the relationships are unique. But how wonderful perspective to say, hey, double down with curiosity. Think about it. Look at where you're going. Open your mind up to what's going on there. And I know it's really changed our lives. It's changed our marriage completely. I was so singular focused for such a long time in my own mind, and that's how it was had everything had to be. And it really took that ability to be able to stop, look around me, be curious about what's going on inside me and inside everyone else that really changed our relationship.
I think it's also really important in conflict. So often when couples get in conflict, they have the same fight over and over and over because they never get just a little bit more curious about what might we actually be fighting about? Or what are we really wanting? Or where are we not understanding each other? Or where are we even saying the same thing and fighting about it? And that little bit of curiosity shifts your capacity to just engage differently.
Absolutely. I'm always asking myself sort of what's the research question I'm tracking, in my marriage and other relationships. Like I'll give you an example. Like earlier this year, I was really developing some pretty good healthy habits, and that's an ebb and flow, right? But I was fascinated to see sort of what would happen with my husband. It would be like, would he start doing better himself? Would he do worse? Like, would he kind of stay the same? If I'm not trying to, change him in any way. That was really interesting to track, right? Not with any kind of judgment, but just to see, do are people caught up in a relationship where one person does worse when the other person functions up a little bit? What's going on there, right? Is the other person very focused on getting the other person to do what they do? There has to be the sameness with everything, right? Just when you can kind of observe that in motion, people are more, like I said, people are more free to do what they want with themselves and to be responsible for themselves. And so I'm always asking myself, what am I trying to pay attention to? And how does that change my thinking about where I need to put my energy, right? Or another classic example could be like if your spouse goes out of town for a period of time, does your functioning go up? Does it go down? Mine goes down. I go stay up later. I'm not eat as healthy. Like and you can shame yourself for that, or you can go, that's really interesting. What do I want to do with that observation? Right? So there's so many opportunities to just pay attention to self and to pay attention to the other person, and then you see sort of what the challenges are and what you want to do with them, right? And I think it applies to so many aspects of the relationship.
It sounds like this become something that's natural for you, right? You're walking in a room, you're saying, "What is the curiosity that's going on here with me and the relationships around it?" When did that start for you? What changed that for you? Because I don't think it's natural for human beings to do that.
Well, I think certainly thinking about this all day for my work helps, right? Because I'm already in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not harder to think about with the family, because it absolutely is, right? I could be on autopilot most of the time too, but I have some good days here and there, and I'm always interested in people's lives and people's families. I think having a curiosity about the functioning in previous generations of my own family certainly helps. I think it's very motivating to want to every generation to do a little bit better, maybe than the last one. That could be a good source for motivation. But I think what's interesting to me is just sort of learning these ideas and systems thinking that haven't necessarily been proven true. It's a theory. And so that's what fascinates me. It's like, okay, I'm looking for evidence that sort of proves or disproves these ideas, and kind of getting to be a scientist in that way is very cool. And I think people don't realize how many interactions they have with other humans during the day, and there are just a million opportunities to pay attention to your autopilot. And you don't have to all the time. Our brains aren't built to do that. We literally don't have the energy to. But you can pick and say, hey, I'm going to go into this meeting and notice what people do when the tension kind of gets stirred up a little bit. I'm going to notice what I do. I'm going to notice how I function after 10 o'clock at night and my anxiety. And that'll be, you get to pick when you want to pay attention. And I think it's contagious in the sense that it just becomes fun.
I was speaking with a wife recently, and she just started noticing every time she thought about her husband coming home, she'd have this feeling of anxiety and dread. And so we got kind of curious about that. Like, why is that? Is it that you feel he's expecting something from you? Is it feel like you have to behave differently? Do you feel? And she was like, he's never explicitly said anything, but I have the idea that when he's home, I have to behave at a certain level and that my performance has to go up. And so if he walks in the door, that anxiety and dread kicks in, even though he has done nothing to demand or expect it. And so just getting curious about that and recognizing you can change that. Like, you don't have to believe that your performance has to go up. You can create space for you, and you can have more space to be yourself. He's not demanding this of you, and even if he were, you could still, make that space for yourself. And it was just an interesting observation for her to get curious enough to notice. She was having the feeling, but wasn't sure why. And so it took a couple weeks of just being curious and observing and watching, like you're talking about. Why is this happening? What is it that I'm thinking here that is creating this? I love in your book how you talk about making anxiety your friend, how it can be like a smoke alarm that gets too sensitive. And I love this because in our house on Tuesdays, we always fry corn tortillas and we make tacos, and the smoke alarm goes off every Tuesday, and everyone in my house knows there's no problem. Like, we're literally about to eat our favorite
We never
meal.
gonna fire on Tuesday.
We never have a fire on Taco Tuesday because nobody will pay attention to it because we love
Right.
those fried corn tortillas, and everyone loves tacos, and so they're excited. And so it's kind of like, as you get more comfortable in this anxiety or more comfortable in curiosity, you can turn down that sensitivity to the alarm and be able to be more comfortable in the discomfort.
Yeah, it's interesting to pay attention to how the language people use to talk about it. If somebody can say, "Ooh, I got real stirred up when I called my mother," or when my husband came home. It's not talked about as a personal failure or even a diagnosis to some extent. It's just sort of like, yeah, the tension got dialed up. What did I do with it? I sensed a threat. But then I was able to get real about whether I really needed to worry about something or not, right? And so just, again, it gets back to that observing, noticing when you get stirred up, when others get stirred up, and then how anxiety distorts sort of the facts, the ability to be objective about what's happening, and how do you get back to some of that reality. Your kid gets stirred up, your spouse gets stirred up, you might think they need a lot more from you than they really do in that moment. Or maybe you try to get away from them as quickly as possible, and that's not helpful either, right?
Run.
Right. I love in the book too, you talk about you gave your anxiety a name. Do you want to tell us
Yeah,
what
I
that
say
name is
Carl.
and what that
Yeah,
helps you with?
no offense to the men. I just decided that was useful to give it a male name.
Was there a past boyfriend or something? What's
Just
a
just a name,
I wanna know.
just a
Come
name.
on. We want the dirt.
No past boyfriends named Carl. Yeah, I think it's just sort of being able to see the function that it serves helps you give it some patience, right? I hear you. I don't think that's a concern right now, Carl, but you keep thinking about that. Like, just the
You get back to me and
yeah,
let me
just sort of
know.
the compassion, that sort of like the what lives in you, right? I love to ask people, are you from a have fun family? Or are you from a be careful family? What do people tell you when you leave or you go do something, right? I'm from a be careful family. So,
How interesting.
you know,
You're the have fun.
Let's go have fun,
That's
man.
his
Let's
life
do
rule.
it.
Have fun, have fun, have
Right.
fun. And I'm from
You
to
know,
be
and some of that
careful.
lives.
No wonder we have problems.
Yeah,
on
some of
board.
that lives in the voice I call Carl, right? It's just the family lives
Yeah.
in that too, and that's useful to recognize
Mhm.
where some of that comes from,
Right.
right? He can't really help it. That was what people told him before he left. He left the house.
Yeah, that's all he's known.
He absorbed it, yeah, and was just the ideas that he marinated in.
Yeah. I love that idea, because I think the reason we don't do it as human beings is it's exposing. It's so scary, right? Because you go back to, there's something wrong with me. I'm doing something wrong. What if people know this? What if they know that I have these feelings, this anxiety, and exposing it? But if we can put it in a place where it's natural and it's part of us as being human beings, and knowing that our brain's just doing the thing it was taught to do, right? This is how God made our brains. It's going to respond this way. And being able to put that logic behind it, I think really helps people allow themselves not to feel so vulnerable and be so exposed, knowing that it's really part of
Yeah,
life.
absolutely. It's a way that we survived, and people have needed to be more tuned into threats for various reasons, right? In the history of the family, and that lives on. And how do you sort of respect that, but also say, you know what, I don't think I need that to the same degree, or I think some flexibility here would be actually be more useful. Sometimes in the family systems world, you know, just the word neutrality is used. I think it doesn't mean. I mean, people often misinterpret neutrality as meaning not having an opinion. And when I use it, it means just being able to see, you know, the benefits and the costs of a certain way of reacting to
It's
things.
real. Yeah. What is the reality? Yeah.
To be more of a scientist,
Observer,
like you said,
yeah.
instead of a judge. Like the judge is attaching punishments or blame or sentencing, and it's that step back for just, I'm going to be observing and be curious, like I would observe an animal in its natural habitat, right? Like what's going on here? What's working? What's not working? And
It goes back to being able to take it out of that primitive side of that brain, that reactionary Carl, and apply logic to it. It gives us our time and pause to say, well, let me think what I think about this. And I love when we say name it and have that relationship with Carl, because you can tell Carl, hey, Carl, thank you for all the information. I'm going to take this in and figure out what I think about it. And I think that's the curiosity part of it. And I thought I was weird when I started doing that. I told Amy, I said, I feel like I have multiple personalities. And she goes, it's not that weird. And I'm like, I think it's weird. But it did help so much to be able to name it and say thank you. Like, I know you're doing your job. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go think about this. I'll get back to you what I think about this. I appreciate it. And it seems to take that anxiety down so many notches.
it also helps you differentiate, right? Like this is me, and then there's this Carl that's screaming, warning, be careful. And you can kind of separate them out and have a conversation between them.
It's weird.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's the
Sorry, what did
voice,
you
it's
say?
your ancestors, it's so many things, right? It's you
Yeah.
know, and it serves
Yeah.
a purpose. And but to me, it's all about getting that choice in how you want to respond. And maybe you do choose to do what's familiar to you, and that's really helpful. And maybe you want to try something different. You know, I often tell couples who have a lot of conflict, I'll say to them, well, you guys could probably chug along doing this. It kind of blows their minds a little bit, right? Because if they're saying like, you know, we
Keep
came
doing it,
here
you
because
want-
we want to stop fighting, right? But being able to see the usefulness of the adaptation, right? Maybe your kids are doing okay because you're not worried about them. You guys have just been focused on each other, right? There are pros and cons to every response, right? And so, you know, I think that frees people up to say, okay, well, you know, this actually does accomplish something, but do we want to keep hitting that button? Or is there a different way, or maybe a better way here? And I think that just takes some of the pressure off, you know, when they can see, you know what,
Right.
we have chugged along in this way of relating to each other.
Choice is never
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah. Speaking of love and marriage, I love your chapter on love. There's several chapters in this on, like I mentioned, all different types of relationships. But since we're marriage coaches, let's go to the love and marriage.
Get to that intimacy.
And one of the first things you talk about is the blame game, which is what we all naturally do, right? Fixate, focus. It's always very apparent what our spouse is doing. And if they would just ... then everything would be okay. And even if we're not blatantly saying it, I was coaching a gentleman the other day and he's like, I've never said those words. when you said, but I think them every single interaction. And I'm like, you
Yeah.
don't have to say them. Like, you are saying
Arnold
them
saying them.
through your behaviors and your gestures and
Yes.
your tone, and the fact that you exit the scene every single time there's a conflict. You are living it out, even if you're not saying it.
Right. Yeah.
And
I
go
think,
ahead.
you know, I know we're talking about marriage, but I think sometimes it's easier for people to see this from a parenting example. Like, for example, you could never tell your kid that you're worried about them, but they absolutely know when you are anxiously focused on them, right? Same idea applies in a marriage. If you're fixated on somebody else's functioning and how they need to do better, like you just said, Amy, you don't have to say that to someone. They can feel that.
Right.
My question for folks is, what are you doing and how well is that working out for you? You know? And,
Yeah. You want to keep
Right.
doing this? Yeah.
and
for a
I also
reason.
think it's such a great barometer, though, to be able to say, wow, I've really been focused on my spouse's functioning this week. Does that tell me
Mhm.
something about how much anxiety there is in, or stress there is in this system? Or maybe I've been experiencing it
Yeah.
somewhere else, like at work, sort of the broader world, but I've brought it home and I've managed it by focusing on how my spouse needs to do better. It can be a good measure of the level of stress, and I think that's helpful for people because they can say, well, maybe if things were going well elsewhere, I wouldn't even be focused on what my spouse is doing with X, right? It may have nothing to do with them, but the focus becomes the way of managing the anxiety and trying to get the other person to grow up. And then people can say, well, you know, is there actually an issue here that needs to be thought about and talked about and addressed? Which it can be. Or is it just I'm more stirred up this week, so I'm more vulnerable to trying to turn my spouse into, as my colleague Jenny Brown would say, into a project. And that's such a great thing for people to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you're more in control
Yes.
if your spouse is a project. Not that you actually are, but there's that false sense of like, I can control them, then I can be more in control, and then this anxiety will lessen, but it actually does just the opposite.
It is a way to steady
Is there
oneself.
anything that
It's a
you-
way to steady yourself.
Yeah. Is there any practical tips on how we get to doing this? I kind of asked this question before. Maybe I just get the answer, but it feels like it becomes natural after a period of time. I know for us that's the same way. But what are some practical tips to stop you from being in the middle of this chaos and not understanding how you're reacting, but put some curiosity behind it? What are some of the tips to do that on a regular basis?
To me, one of the most basic questions is just, where is my energy going? How am I trying to grow others up? Again, how effective has that been? And how do I take some of that energy and put it back on myself? Now, that doesn't mean you ignore problems or let people get away with things, right? But it's all about, how do I want to manage myself as I talk about, you know, this issue with my spouse, or we think about this challenge together. How is that useful for them and their brain to start working also, right? Is there more than one way for things to get better? Often we see others as the key to things getting better. So,
And we can't control them. That's the problem, right? That's the frustration. We have zero control of that.
All our focus goes there, all our attention,
So we
all
put our
of
energy on something they can't do anything about.
It's very frustrating, and also usually is like a self-fulfilling prophecy in the worst way, meaning the thing that you fear the most, you're actually creating.
Yeah, and I'll
like distance or disharmony.
Yeah, I'll also just tell people to pick a day or a week and just pay attention how they try to be over responsible for others, or how they're focused on others, and how I sometimes call it sort of the check engine light. The example you gave with the woman who is focused on,
Yeah.
you know, her husband walking through the door. I think that's kind of a check engine light of, oh, I need to get clear with myself about how I want to be in my marriage. And if I have that definition, then I'm not as focused on how the other person is reacting to me minute to minute, because I have my beliefs, my North Star about who I'm trying to be, right? And so I think
Right.
the focus on the other is, to me, is an indicator of a lack of clear thinking about how you want to function, what kind of maturity, you know, you want to bring to the relationship. I think that's true for so many things. I think that's That's true for intimacy. That's true for how people parent together. Our focus just automatically shifts to the other. You're the key to things getting better, and this is how you're going to get better. I've outlined it for you. You're gonna read this book. We're gonna do this. You know,
You're gonna do
versus
this.
like,
You're gonna stop
you know,
doing
Yeah,
this.
you're going
versus
do
saying to
this,
the other
yeah.
person, I think this is a challenge and an opportunity. Do you have thoughts about what you want to do with that? Because I'm interested in that thinking, right?
It-
Um,
It's so true, right? We talk about intimacy and all the struggles that we had in our relationship. That's when it finally switched and changed. When I was like, oh, I might be the problem, right? Like when I finally decided it wasn't because Amy needs to
Right.
learn all these great things about sex and
Yeah.
how to deal with it. And if she would grow up and have this desire, everything would be great. I realized I was the problem and changed the focus on me. And once that took place, it was the huge shift because Amy's like, whoa, that's different. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on over there, Greg? And it allowed her the space to look into herself. So I 100% agree with this. We go throughout our day, we put the focus on the other person, and it's really turning inwards. And I loved how you used the word, where am I putting my energy? Is it going somewhere where I can't control it? Or is it going somewhere where I can be curious about it and learn and control?
I think the first mistake people make once they realize that is then they get caught into the trap of, well, I'm going to change myself to change you, which also is
An ulterior
which is
motive.
not a focus on self. It's a focus on the other disguised as focus
It's
on
a roundabout way of getting to it back to the thing.
It's just the flip, the same
Yeah.
action.
like
but
I'm
in a
going to
flip,
become
right?
so
Like,
interested
I'm
in
gonna do
this
it
that you have no
covertly.
choice but to be
Yeah.
better at it too, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of intensity to that, right? There's no freedom in
Right.
that. I'm going to add
No.
that.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to distance myself so far. Or I'm going to run away from this so far that you can't even be around me because now I'm going to do it
Absolutely.
that way. So there's so many ways we go to try to manipulate the situation
Mhm.
instead of just clear looking at ourselves. And it goes back again, like we need to take away the stigmatism of this exposure, right? This is being human and everyone deals with it. It's not like some person's perfect that have figured out how to deal with this in a way that they don't need it. It's part of being alive. It's part of being human. But yet we put this stigmatism on it that makes it feel like we're broken or there's shame around it.
I think people also fear like the vulnerability of saying, here's what I see I'm doing, or here's what I see is happening. And they feel like if they're not attacking or if they're not trying to take control of their spouse or they're not distancing, they feel like maybe they're going to be a doormat or not.
Yeah, I'm going to lose.
I'm going to lose, or I can't back down, or I can't see this from a different stance because then I'll lose or they'll win. And I don't want them to win. Right? Like it becomes a lot more about in this power struggle that they have to hear me and they have to agree with me. Otherwise, I won't be okay. And the willingness to say, no, you can have your own thoughts. In fact, not only can you have them, I'm going to be curious about them now, just opens up so many new possibilities, but they're afraid that that curiosity will make them lose
Less. Yeah.
like who they are or their beliefs, and they feel like, oh, then I'll become a doormat. And I'm like, it's just the opposite. It's standing in the strength of who you are and being able to know and get to know your spouse without feeling threatened by that. Like, of course they have a different opinion. Greg and I very rarely agree on anything. And so can you actually like make room for them and not see that as a threat is one thing I see a lot in couples.
I think what people have to think about is if you shift gears, that generates some anxiety and stress, and that can feel like you're admitting defeat or you're saying, okay, yeah, it's my fault, right? But that feeling is just what gets stirred up when a relationship or a system has to make a shift, right? Into something different, right? And if people can kind of recognize that and see that, what sometimes in Bowen theory is called the anxiety of progress, right? Of this is going to feel strange or uncomfortable to me because my way of dealing with the tension has been to focus on my spouse. And if all of a sudden I'm not doing that anymore, then that's more of the anxiety for me to have to manage in a different way, right?
Right.
And then people can say,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, that's not a sign anything's wrong. It's just a sign there's a shift that's happening, and and I'm going to have to hang in there and recognize that discomfort won't kill me." But it's hard.
That's where the way we easily lose it, right? Because we can get spouses and ourselves there, but once we hit that hardness, we back off. That's what we found in our marriage. We were probably at that wall 100 times beating our head against it. And if we would have just broken through it and got to the other side, it would have gotten much better. But it got so uncomfortable in there, we weren't willing to do
You
it.
back
And that's
away
where
from
we
it.
needed coaches and people to say, no, go, keep going.
Like,
You're almost there.
this is a productive discomfort.
Mhm.
Keep going. Like, it's not going wrong. And I think what people get wrong so often is that courage feels really terrible.
It does.
When you are making a courageous change, it feels terrible. And we have this idea that it's going to feel so glowing and warm and wonderful. And like, it's this heralded virtue of courage. But in the moment of courage, you feel horrible. Your heart's racing. You feel sick to your stomach. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so risky. There's a lot of anxiety. But it's that willingness to go through that discomfort, to step into that change that starts to produce new capacities. But it doesn't
Right.
feel good.
This isn't marriage, but I'm thinking of like meetings I've been a part of where I've been brave and said something I believed, or, I felt like the dumbest person ever when that meeting is over, right? And that's not a sign that I am.
Mhm.
It's just a sign that I did something anxiety producing, right? And so how do you recognize that?
Mhm.
That's just that wave hitting you, in a different way, and that's something to be proud of and sort of keep at.
Right. It's almost a sign that you're doing the right thing, which we take
Mhm.
it the opposite, right? You're being courageous, you're stepping out, and we often retreat.
Well, because it's unfamiliar.
Yep.
So we like the familiar. In your second book, True to You, you talk about people pleasing and being willing to be yourself. And that anxiety right there, when you start to make a change, is what, like as people pleasers or accommodators, that you were trying to avoid. You were trying to just keep the system happy, keep everyone functioning, keep everyone happy with you, and keep everything at this like status quo around you, externally outside of you, so that you can control your internal anxiety. And when I read this book, True to You, I was like convicted. Like every page, I'm like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I think on one of our podcasts, I read the list of your 50 ways you know you're an overfunctioner. And
Yeah.
I'm like, the first time I read it, one night when Greg was sitting next to
He's
me,
defining me.
I'm like, is she following me?
Yeah.
Like, what is going
In
on?
my head.
I am always the subject when people are like, "Are you writing about me?" I'm just like, "No, I'm just writing about myself."
Like, oh my gosh, I think I have done every single one of these, or desired to, if I haven't actually done it. And I lived in that world of, let me keep my children functioning away so that I can be okay. Let me keep my husband functioning in a way so that I can be okay. Let me keep the image of me in a certain way so that I can be okay. And I think one of the lines in your book where you talk about people pleasing is not a personality trait, but like a way of a type of functioning. And that was like so freeing, because I think myself and a lot of other people see people pleasing as like, oh, this is who I am, or this is part of my personality. And when you can step back from that and say, no, it's a way that I learned to function to try and keep my anxiety at a certain level. Although it did increase my anxiety, but it seemed to offer, um, a capacity to lower it. And then you see it as a choice instead of a trait.
There's always someone on the other end of it who is inviting that over involvement, right? If it's a pattern over time, and that it doesn't let you off the hook, but it's a different way of seeing it as something that you're guilty of. It's a way, it's a way that the system or the relationship has been able to keep things steady, right? Like if you think of a group, it's useful to have people who are concerned about whether people feel welcome or not, whether people, are being nice to each other, right? Like that's useful. You need people, right? But it's not always a trait that needs to be turned on. And so that's why I think it's not so much a personality thing as it is like getting back to that idea of the barometer, that it goes up and down depending on how much tension and stress there is, right? And it's useful for you to pay attention to the particular relationships that bring that out, or the sort of the levels of of stress, right? And the only other thing I'll add is that the people who can kind of smile at themselves and say, "Well, I don't need this book because I do whatever I want. I'm a maverick," right? That can be the other side of the coin too, right?
Yes.
The not care, like, I don't care what people think, right? How much of that is reactivity, right? And there's not a lot of,
I mean, honestly,
there's not a lot of choice in that either, right? So you can be driven in both directions, sort of the giving in or the kind of the distancing in that way.
Honestly, when I finally dug into it, there was no security in it at all. I remember the time I told Amy, I said, if you knew what was going on inside of me, you would be shocked, because she thought I was always confident and, I didn't really care what other people think about me, and I was just going to do my thing. Like, literally, I was on the other side of that coin trying to manage the system by my distancing myself or just acting in a certain way, when inside of me, it's like the duck on the water, I like to say, right? You look at the duck and it's gliding just gracefully across the water, but if you were to see underneath it, its little feet are going crazy. And that was for sure.
Absolutely.
Me.
But you were appearing as if,
yeah, I was appearing like everything was calm and everything was good, and
it didn't matter. It's okay. It didn't affect him. And yeah, we were classic. I was over and he was an under. And I mean, we still tend towards those. I think we always will. But just awareness of them. And I think you had a quote in there where you were telling your husband, I think, how to cut a cantaloupe or something. And he says, "I'm a self," and I'm like,
"I'm a self." I'm gonna start using that. I love it.
Yes, you've said that.
He doesn't. He knows just enough to be dangerous. I don't want him to learn any more, because then he'll throw it back at me, and I don't like that.
Using it.
I appreciate he doesn't know too much, but he knows enough to say, I've got this. Watch me be responsible, It's a good reminder to me.
Yeah, you don't need to come behind me and tell me how to do it. Which, I mean, that dynamic has played out between us.
Huge.
So many times, and I'm like, again, oh my gosh, she's following me. Like, yes, I love that line though, and I have used it in coaching. Just let people know.
Just like, no, I'm going to use it. So.
You can claim it. You're a self. You can cut the cantaloupe however you want, and it's still going to be cantaloupe. It's whether it's in balls or cubes, or they're uneven, or little whatever. It's still going to be
my other favorite line. I'll tell people to try saying sometimes is, "You have no idea how high I can fly." Like, watch how high I can fly. Watch me, load the dishwasher.
Yeah, like go and
watch me parent our these
children,
you. Right? Like, it's just kind of adding some humor, right? Reminding the other person that you're in charge of yourself. You want to see what you can do with it. You got to let the B team on the field sometimes, right? Like, you got to.
Yeah. You're not going to get any better at doing the dishes if you keep redoing them.
I would go behind him and reload or redo
and she wondered why we didn't do the dishes, because it was done again.
I hear you.
That doesn't happen anymore, by the way.
No, it doesn't. But that same, you talk about the burnout that comes from the people pleasing and the not being true to yourself, not knowing yourself, by identifying your worth outside of you through these external factors. And that was me. Everything outside of me was defining me. And if one of those shifted or changed, it would throw me completely off course, which is always a blessing when it happens, but I didn't see it as a blessing. And when clients come in, and they get thrown off course, I'm like, yay, this is amazing, because now you have this chance to think about, what do you really believe? What do you really want? Instead of going on that automatic pilot of using, how your children are doing, or your job, or your status, or your home, or, how you're looking on Facebook and how many likes you're getting for whatever. It's that opportunity to dig deeper and to get to know yourself better and to define through more internal factors instead of those external ones. And the external ones are exhausting. They're so exhausting. And I would hit this like burnout wall, be like, boom, 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 I'm achieving, boom, burnout, and could not see like what was happening in between. But it was this people pleasing and this accommodating and needing to manage everything around me, which was going well. It really wasn't.
There's quotes, by the way, for people watching.
It wasn't going well at all, but it had the appearance of it, and then it would just explode. And those explosions were actually really important for me to delve into and see, how am I deciding to do things? Why am I deciding? Instead of like, I'm a taskless girl. So instead of the what of the task list, but more of why am I choosing to do this? Or am I actually even making the choice and I'm just running on automatic pilot thinking that I should? So this book convicted me. I mean, you got me good.
We're all working on it. We all have those challenges. Some of them are easier to see than others. Like I like the Greg, the analogy of the duck, right? Like I think of marriages where one person sort of gets the symptom, right? Or they're more visibly anxious than the other person, but there's no less anxiety in the other person. There's and that's a unit. And how do you not get too focused on or blamey on the person who's the most visibly, let's say, kind of worse stirred up, because it's reciprocal.
Because sometimes they're just reacting. Yeah. Like one's a bomb maker,
Right.
one's reacting to the bomb, and the reaction may get more attention, but there's bomb maker too, right? Like there's two people in this.
And like we have to say a lot of times is one person thinks they're so much advanced than the other. And that's just not true. You wouldn't stay in a relationship with someone if you were that way. If you really were that case, then you're at a point where that relationship's probably going to end. So you are on the same level. You just are exposed differently, right? You just show it differently, and that's so true. And when we can think of it that way, we can that helps go back to what we talked about, taking the focus away from the others and looking at yourself and saying, how is this showing up in me? If I'm seeing this in my spouse and I'm concerned about it and I don't like this behavior, how's it showing up in me? Because like you said, we're a unit. We're one.
Right.
We're one.
Yeah. If my wife's trying to make everybody happy, let's say in the husband's family, well, is the husband more distant with everybody? Has she sort of filled in the gap because of, his reactivity has been to avoid, to not engage, to not care, right? And him working on his part may make a huge difference in sort of how the wife functions as well. And so I think people, once they start to see that sort of interconnectedness, then they see their part, and that's something they can play around with and try and get a little bit more responsible with.
That's scary. You got to take ownership.
That's the scary part. It's like changing the dance, right? We're in this dance, and when you realize, okay, this is my part of the dance, let me take ownership for it. I can change the dance, and that's an opportunity for them, but they may or may not accept it. They always have that choice too. But at least it's an opportunity there, right? Instead of trying to force them to dance in the way you want, which doesn't ever really end well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk about the overfunctioning because that was where I was and where I'm always sort of on alert. Although in your book, you talk about the over, the under, the accommodating, the acting out, the avoiding. You talk about all of these different patterns. So go read it, everyone. There's lots more we haven't even touched on. But you asked this one question for the overfunctioner that to me really stood out. And it was, what am I doing that others can do for themselves? And where can I come back into myself and let them decide and be and, have their own way? And that was a really critical question. In both books, you talk about growing questions that ask you to look at yourself a little bit more, look at why you're doing what you're doing or what you're believing that's leading to what you're doing. And I feel like that was one of those questions that was like, yes, you get maybe your validation from being the doer, but where are you doing things that really aren't yours to do? And we've talked a lot about how I overtook your health and how I would overdo in the house and I would overdo as a parent for my children. I mean, I was just overdoing it everywhere. And that question was like that, whoa. Yeah, because if I'm overdoing, I'm actually holding them back. Like from allowing them to develop and allowing them to grow and allowing them to have all of these experiences. And it's not that I'm not going to love them and be interested and engaged with them, but where am I doing what is actually theirs?
Yeah, it's such a hard thing to change, but it's pretty easy to start to pay attention to because there are just so many opportunities to observe. And also, I think, how does that get in the way of having a good one-to-one relationship with somebody? It's hard to be curious about somebody's thinking or their challenges or what they believe if you're kind of managing, right? And so what opens up when you step back and let people sort of be more responsible for themselves? They start to become more interesting, I think. And when they become more
Yeah.
interesting, you see their
more
you see their
attractive.
capabilities. Yeah, definitely in like a romantic relationship or in a marriage, people become more attractive. I also think just what does that free up in you that becomes attractive to the other person as well.
Interesting. I think it's like you talk about your
Yeah.
energy. Where are you putting your energy?
Mhm.
There's only a finite amount of it. Are you burning
Mhm.
it somewhere you don't want to burn it?
Where it's not really actually supporting or helping your relationship or yourself to thrive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. We're so glad you came
Yeah.
on with us. We really appreciate it. Can you tell our audience how they engage with you? You know, we have these 2 wonderful books. They're on our website. You can go order them straight off of there. But how else would the audience
Yeah,
engage
they
with
can
you?
just go to my website, which is Kathleen Smith Writes, WRITES.com, or my Substack, which I write every week, which is called The Anxious Overachiever. And they'll find some systems thinking there if they
I
if
feel
they
seen.
if they don't want to buy a whole
I'm sure you're
book,
not
you know,
writing
that
that.
you can get some thinking for free. I like to say it's what if your therapist emailed you every week, and you know, with some of their thinking is sort of my pitch for that. So that's where you can find me.
Thank you so much for being so open and honest. It's such a breath of fresh air, and we really
Well, thank
appreciate
you
it.
guys.
Yes. And thank you for your work and your efforts and your honesty. And yeah, thank you.
You are welcome.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you. Again, go visit us on langfordlifecoaching.com. We also like to, if you would like and subscribe to the podcast, give us those stars and thumbs up or whatever your podcast thingy is, and we would enjoy that. So thanks again. And until next time,
Keep undressing your intimacy.
bye-bye.